All right, lots of people hopping on here.
Penny.
Okay, well, it is 12:45. I'm sure we might see a few people continue to trickle in, and if so, I can admit them. Oh, why don't we give it one more minute, just in case? I know it's a lunch hour. Oh, and there we go, more people.
It's a race to admit.
Yeah.
That gets a point.
Yeah. Okay, well, again, good afternoon. Thank you for everyone for joining us again for our next session here for the UPIN Family Conference. We're excited to get started with this keynote address from Leslie Krongold, but before we do, we have asked Dr. Missy Dixon to give kind of a brief intro about Leslie before she gets started. So without further ado, Dr. Dixon.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the conference. We are really delighted to have Dr. Leslie Krongold join us as our keynote speaker today for this conference, and we're really lucky together. Leslie is unstoppable. She was diagnosed with myotonic dystrophy when she was in her 30s, and she's really an inspiration to anyone, and most especially to those who are living with disability. I first met Leslie several years ago at a myotonic dystrophy conference, and I've really been in awe of her empathy and her knowledge and her willingness to share her experience with others, most notably to help educate others. And with that, she really is a devoted educator. She has a doctorate degree in education. She's passionate about coaching others through both the challenges and the positive aspects of living with a disability and of diagnosis. She shares messages of courage and strength and positivity via her podcast, The Glass Half Full. And she works to normalize and validate emotional experiences of individuals who are impacted by debilitating conditions. Leslie has been a facilitator of support groups for many years, and she continues this important work. She is also just completely available to share her wisdom more broadly, whether it's in the group or through her podcast. And today she's going to talk with us about making connections. And interestingly, this topic is one that we were all discussing more widely in our community here in Utah prior to COVID and the pandemic, and it is certainly salient now. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Dr. Krongold has to say about making connections. So thank you for taking the time to present to us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Leslie Krongold. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. Thank you for inviting me to this community. And although I am due west of you in Northern California, I am part of your community. I have myotonic dystrophy type 1. I lost my mother nearly 30 years ago to DM and cancer, as well as several aunts and uncles on my mom's side of the family, and none of them knew they had myotonic dystrophy. So let's see. In this presentation, I do have, okay, I have a couple of polls, I have some videos, so hopefully all the technology will move smoothly. But before I tell you more about myself and explain why Dr. Dixon asked me to speak here, I'd like to know something about you, the audience. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. This is the first one, and this is just a graphic to show you what hopefully will pop up on your electronic device when I advance to the next screen. So,
Leslie,
yeah.
yep, this is Dr. Butterfield. I was just going to say there's a little button on the bottom that says polls. If it doesn't pop up, just everyone click the polls button.
Oh, okay, but I'm not ready to launch it yet.
All right.
Yeah, because it's possible that some people have never taken a poll on Zoom. So I just wanted to explain that the window that will pop up will look like this. And so I'd like to know, who you are. And the first one, is patient. And although I don't really care for that term, we're not in a hospital or clinic setting right now. I, would identify as a patient. And if you are the spouse or unaffected family member of someone with a neuromuscular disease, please identify as a caregiver. And I know there's some married folks who might not view themselves as caregivers, but if you're here and your partner who has the neuromuscular disease is not in the room with you, then I'm viewing you as a caregiver. And if you're a family all gathered around an electronic device, you can identify as family. And then maybe you're a healthcare professional, a researcher, a physical therapist, someone who doesn't have a neuromuscular disease in your family, if you could identify as a healthcare provider. And then if you're an other, please identify as an other. So let's see. Gabby, could you launch the poll? There you go. Great. So if you could just click who you are. And I think we're almost done. Yay. Okay. Could you share the results, Gabby? Okay, well that is interesting, especially the others. If we had more time, I'd want to drill down and find out, who are you? Did you just pass through the Zoom meeting and decide to stay? Okay, thank you, Gabby. You could stop sharing that now. Okay, so whoops. Gabby, I don't think I can close the poll. Is it still up on other people's screens?
I think I've closed it.
Oh, okay.
Is it still showing up on your screen?
Yeah, it is, but that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, if it's still showing up on your screen and you want to shoot a message into the chat, let me know. I'll see if I can do some investigating.
Okay. Thanks for doing that. That went very smoothly. I feel confident now. So I told you, where I am and that I have myotonic dystrophy, a few other relevant identifiers, and Dr. Dixon mentioned this, is that I've been facilitating support groups for nearly 23 years. I started with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and then in 2012, I worked as the outreach director for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation and launched support groups nationally as well as in Canada and Europe. And over 4 years ago, I started a podcast called Glass Half Full, which I see as an evolution of my role as a support group facilitator. And my target audience for the podcast are people with chronic health conditions and caregivers. And of course, anyone else, even the others, even the two people who are others. And so when I worked full time, I was an educator, and I brought that to my approach with support groups. And in my support groups, we don't sit in a circle and mope about our conditions. Many of the guest speakers and topics we explore at the support group meetings are about tools, resources, and services to enhance the quality of our lives. And in my own journey as a patient, as well as my experience as a facilitator, I learned more about how to take better care of myself physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I feel like I've gradually evolved my self-care regimen to a fine art. So in the past, I've talked to groups about what it's like to have a neuromuscular disease, but if you're a patient or a caregiver, you already know that. I've talked about self-care, my self-care pyramid, and how diet, exercise, and attitude are all vital to my well-being. So I asked Dr. Dixon, what should I speak about? And she suggested connections. So this is my interpretation. This is my experience of connections. Okay, there we go. So although I've never specifically talked about social connections, the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's been a thread throughout my life. And by connection, I'm talking about social connections, or often referred to as social support. And I'll revisit the term social support later. But in the last 10 years or so, I've realized that I'm something of a community organizer, small-time organizer. I have no aspirations to lead organizations or run for a political office. I just like to be connected to people, different kinds of people in a variety of ways. I am, or I was an only child. I'm an only adult now. My parents had siblings, but my mother's family was in New York and I grew up in Florida. My father had a sister in Florida, but they were not close. Therefore, my friendship connections were perhaps more significant to me than someone who came from a larger family. So these are two books that had that inspired me when I was younger. I was in middle school. I became fascinated with psychology. Psychology for You by Saul Gordon was a book I discovered in the library, and it wasn't for a class. It was just looking through the shelves, and the cover intrigued me, and I ended up reading it cover to cover, and everything in between. So, excuse me, psychology opened up my mind. In my first year of high school, there was a psychology class, and the text was The Social Animal. And I can't really tell you any memories from the text, but the term social animal stayed with me. And the concept of humans as social animals, is fascinating. We want, need, and long to connect. Yes, pets are important. We have 5 cats. They're very important. I love them very much. But as a human, I need to connect with other human beings and feel a sense of belonging to a community. Actually, personally, I'm connected to many communities. And I'll talk more about that later. But I'd like to share a short excerpt from my first podcast episode, which was in March of 2016. And by the way, podcasts are audio only. The original podcast is about 30 minutes long, but I took a 10-minute excerpt and made it a video, so it'll be a little more engaging to listen to and watch. And I'm going to play this. Okay, you'll see more pictures in a moment.
Welcome to Glass Half Full with Leslie Krongold. She shares her stories, experiences, and knowledge of living and coping with a chronic health condition. Learn about tools and resources and hear inspirational interviews that help you to live a life filled with quality and dignity. With 2 decades of support group leadership, Leslie's ready to help you make lemonade out of life's lemons. Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to my community. Well, I'm going to share a little about myself with you in this inaugural podcast, and hopefully you'll join me to become part of this community. Believe me, I don't want to spend all this time talking with myself. I'd much prefer a conversation with another human. And that's what we'll do for the future episodes. I'll have conversations with others, friends, caregivers, and other people coping with a chronic health condition, as well as practitioners and healers who have helped people develop positive coping tools. And eventually, I hope you'll become part of this conversation and the community. I'm Leslie Krongold. I live in Northern California, and I'm originally from Miami, Florida. My journey has been a surprise. You don't really think about health problems when you're a teenager and young adult. You feel invincible most of the time. Saying I had a normal childhood really means little except in the context of now having a chronic health condition that shapes how and what I do every day. My health was generally good in my earlier life, and I'm grateful for that. Though many of the minor anomalies I experience now make sense as part of this slowly progressive genetic condition I have. But let me start with another part of the story and work backwards. I don't relish telling my story. I'm more the type of person that poses questions to others, asking about their story, and I tend to take a back seat. But I feel my story is perhaps relevant for you to understand how I came to launch a podcast called Glass Half Full and why you might want to join me for this part of the journey. In my mid-30s, I distinctly remember going out to lunch with a work colleague. And as I grasped the door handle to get out of his car, my hand wouldn't release its grip. I don't think he noticed, but I certainly did. It was odd, and it would harken back to a memory from several years prior of my mother talking about difficulty with her wrists and grip. My mother had had many different ailments when I was growing up and spent time in hospitals for cataract surgery, gallbladder surgery, gastrointestinal stress, breathing problems, you name it. She also had a lifestyle of cigarette smoking and daily alcohol consumption that could have exacerbated her health. So suffice it to say, I was neither on top of each medical diagnosis nor hospital visit she had since I lived across the country. She had told me about a muscle condition which necessitated a visit to the University of Miami Medical School, where medical students observed her calf muscles. Apparently, one leg had less muscle tone than the other leg. I don't recall her telling me it was a rare muscular dystrophy, and I certainly didn't hear that it was hereditary. What I most remember is a phone call approximately 13 months before she died when my parents told me she had had a seizure, was rushed to the hospital, and eventually diagnosed with brain cancer, which metastasized from lung cancer. During those 13 months, I visited her a few times and talked with her frequently. My father never mentioned the doctors knew she would die within a year. I thought the radiation treatments and drugs were to help cure her. Of course, this is nearly 25 years ago. So when I reached for the door in my friend's car and couldn't quite release my grip, I remembered my mom. Now, I can't recall how soon after that experience I went to see a doctor. Maybe I had a few more experiences of difficulty releasing my hand grip. The next point would be a visit with my HMO's general practitioner. I had seen her maybe once or twice before. I probably thought she seemed like a good doctor with whatever minor issue I'd presented her with. Well, after her cursory check of my hands and muscles, She scheduled me for blood work panel to see if I was nutritionally deficient. These tests came back negative, and then she scheduled me for a visit to a neurologist, a brain doctor. I don't think my public school education included much study of human anatomy, and my college study of filmmaking certainly didn't cover neurology. Well, my memory of the next few steps is muddled. How many times did I see the neurologist until she had a definitive diagnosis? I'm not sure. That definitive diagnosis included a DNA test, which resulted in confirmation that I had a rare disorder called myotonic dystrophy. Seeing the results on paper didn't emotionally penetrate me, but the diagnostics leading up to the DNA test is what I most remember. The EMG, and an EMG is an electrodiagnostic medicine technique for evaluating and recording the electrical activity produced by skeletal muscles. And this was accomplished by the neurologist inserting a needle into several of my muscles, mostly different parts of my legs, and listening for extended bursts of electrical discharges that are indicative of abnormal electrical signals associated with the slowing of muscle relaxation. So I lay there, in an uncomfortable paper gown, and this specialist is probing my body with needles, and I heard these very disturbing sounds. And the neurologist, who was a very young and super smart woman, got excited. It must be like finding those key puzzle pieces to solve a mysterious puzzle. Eureka! I've identified your rare condition. And whatever words she used to explain this epiphany to me, I don't recall, but I do remember a feeling of your life is not what you expected it to be. And I know I stifled a few tears, and I remember wondering if she was aware of how this moment was impacting me. After that, I'm sure I shared the news with a few friends, but I can't remember anyone's reaction really. My everyday life was essentially the same. I worked a lot. At that time, I was an educational multimedia producer, and my work life involved a lot of travel across the country. My father's reaction to my diagnosis was a few notches short of empathetic. He claimed to have talked with doctors that reassured him I had nothing to worry about. My life would be normal. I didn't know anyone with myotonic dystrophy, but I was aware that it was one of the many neuromuscular diseases covered by the patient advocacy organization, Muscular Dystrophy Association, or MDA. Who in America hadn't grown up with the annual Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethon to raise money and awareness for children with neuromuscular disease?
Okay, I stopped short a little, but you're not really missing anything. Because this is where I pick up is the Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethon. So I watched it every year religiously. It used to be 24 hours of television at that time, and I would try to stay up and watch as much of it as I could. And I was so enamored with the show that in elementary school, I remember I sent away to the MDA office to get a kit on how to hold a carnival to fundraise for MDA. And I remember receiving the kit and talking to friends about it, but I just couldn't get it together to pull it off. But a few years later, in high school, let's say it was about 1977, the trend was dance marathons. And that I was able to organize. I held 2 dance marathons at our local shopping mall in South Florida. And together they raised over $4,000 for MDA. And I got to present the check to a local personality. That's that guy in the white shirt on the left. His name was Skipper Chuck. He had a TV show. Anyhow, I volunteered at the MDA office after school. I stuffed envelopes with fundraising letters. I was a camp counselor. That's what those pictures are, the MDA summer camp. And my camper is in the photo below me. She was 14 years old and had neuromuscular disease as well as developmental delays. And years later, I was looking at these photos and I realized that that young girl probably had congenital DM, myotonic dystrophy. So this is kind of a major irony in my life. So back in 1998, when I was diagnosed, I was prepared. I felt guided by some omnipotence to engage, with a fierceness that I could not explain. I didn't know, DM was in my family. I didn't have any other family members who had any kind of neuromuscular disease. So I wasted no time out here in California, called the MDA office, and I joined a support group. I can't say that my initial experience was remarkable in the support group. I was ambulatory, I still worked full time, and I had minimal symptoms. And there were people in the support group with severe muscle atrophy, using wheelchairs and other assistive devices. And I understand that some people are reluctant to go to support groups because they may see people with more advanced progression. But I wasn't really fazed by that, and perhaps it had to do with my early experiences with MDA as a teenager. And the facilitator was a nice enough woman, but to me, she sort of talked about herself incessantly. But I made a friend at those initial meetings who turned out to be a lifelong friend until, she passed away a couple of years ago. This is Jill, and she had FSH, and it was really important, our friendship. She was kind of a mentor to me in terms of acclimating to, the diagnosis. She was from New York and had a dark sense of humor. And within a few months, again, somewhat ironically, the facilitator of the group left due to burnout, and the young MDA staff person, who was called a healthcare services coordinator, asked me to facilitate the group. I have no idea why she chose me. I don't recall speaking very much at the group meetings. I had no prior experience with support groups, but her decision to ask me certainly changed my life. So before I continue, I'd like to check in with you about your experience with support groups. So Gabby, could you launch the second poll? This is just a question asking whether you've attended an in-person support group in your life. It could be any kind of support group, and if you're a caregiver, it could be a support group specifically for caregivers. So let's see. We're almost done. Oh, it's pretty much 50-50. Okay, great. Thank you, Gabby. Okay, So, before my diagnosis, I never attended a support group. I had an idea of what they might be. People sitting in a circle, feeling sorry for themselves. I mean, those groups do exist. The one I attended at MDA wasn't really like that. We met at a hotel in a small conference room with a long, narrow table that was filled with finger foods and beverages. It was kind of corporate, kind of business-like. It didn't allow for much intimacy. And as I mentioned, the facilitator dominated the conversation, but no one really seemed to mind. She was well liked. So when I was tasked with this new role, I didn't have much to fall back on. MDA didn't provide me with any kind of training, no pamphlet. And there weren't a zillion websites or even YouTube videos to turn to. For me, it was very much uncharted terrain. So first, I found a new meeting location, a classroom at our local Kaiser Permanent Day facility. It's a hospital, but also it has a training section, so it didn't feel like a medical office, and it was donated and it was ADA accessible, which was important. We met monthly. I usually had a guest speaker, but we'd always start the meeting with a check-in. My approach, as I mentioned, was from an educator's perspective. Let's learn from others. And over the years, I learned so much, not only from the guest speakers, I learned from my fellow support group members. One father of an adult with DM was a handyman of sorts. He had rigged together various devices to help his daughter, Amy, do things that she started having difficulties with, like removing the plastic covering from her newly dry cleaned clothes or accessing something from a hard to reach shelf. We had occupational therapists as guest speakers, but eventually we started to hold our own DIY, do it yourself OT meeting where members brought in samples of devices or shared how they had made ADL's activities of daily living more manageable for themselves or their family members. And the more I learned about the group members, the richer we became as a community. Every holiday season, we would have a potluck. I bought a 1-burner stove on Amazon, and I would heat up some homemade soup, and people would share some of their creative hobbies and bring in samples of artwork. It became a tradition, and we bonded even more. So the amazing thing about this support group is I never would have met most of these people had I not been diagnosed with the neuromuscular disease. We didn't travel in the same circles. Our differences were obvious, whether it be age, ethnicity, culture, or religious backgrounds, political beliefs, socioeconomic status, or education. But as time went on, I really began to care about these people. We shared something that went even deeper, and not just the fact that we had similar diseases. We were all willing to share about ourselves and learn from each other. So when you're in a support group for a long time, you'll eventually have to deal with some tough issues. In my 23 years of facilitation, I had a few, let's say, difficult people. It took a while for me to learn the skills necessary to handle difficult people, but mostly there were not too many difficult people. I don't want to scare anyone. But another challenge was dealing with the death of a member. Frank and his wife had become core members of our group. He had been in decline for several months, but when he passed away, it was still a shocker for everyone. His wife, Nancy, belonged to a church and planned a memorial service that most of our support group members attended. And it was such a pivotal experience for me that I wrote a blog post about it. I remember it as my turning point when I began to see my support group members as family. Okay, so around this time, 2010, well, actually a few years earlier, I returned to school, a doctoral program in education. And this 5-year academic journey led me to focus on adult learning theories, especially as they applied to adults experiencing a life transformation. For example, when you're diagnosed with a progressive chronic health condition. And I began researching support groups. And before you start writing a doctoral thesis, you read as much research literature as you can on that topic. Well, excuse me, I couldn't find any research related to support groups for adults with muscular dystrophy, but I found a lot on people diagnosed with cancer, diabetes, AIDS, and some on people with other neurological conditions like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis. I mentioned earlier that one topic I have talked about at conferences and workshops is self-care. Another term for self-care, at least in the research literature, is self-management health behaviors. And these include breathing techniques, exercise, fatigue management, medication management, pain management, and relaxation and emotions. And as I read, I began to finalize what my research questions were, what I wanted to focus on. So the title of my dissertation, and this is a mouthful, Professional and Lay Facilitators' Perceptions of Roles, Goals, and Strategies to Promote Social Support and Self-Management in Face-to-Face Support Groups for Adults with Multiple Sclerosis and Myotonic Muscular Dystrophy. The vast majority of my survey respondents were facilitators of MS groups. I had, I think, 6 people from myotonic dystrophy support groups. Excuse me for one moment. So I realized that and one of the other things I did was I observed other support groups, because up until this time, I had not attended a support group other than mine. And that's when I realized there are many different ways to facilitate or not facilitate a support group. But I'm not here to talk about launching or maintaining a support group. If you're interested in that, you can always contact me. But what I would like to convey from my research are 3 things. 1, there's solid research showing that participation in a support group has both physical and emotional health benefits. 2, you can benefit from a support group not specific to your disease or condition. And 3, there are 5 different types of support that are often offered in support groups. And these are not rocket science, but it's a nice way to think about the different dimensions of social support. So, informational support can be any sort of referral to an expert, a book, a website, or an organization. At the end of this presentation, I have a few links, website links to share with you. So that would be informational support. Tangible assistance includes a communication or act that provides direct or indirect tasks, such as offering to help in some capacity, like shopping for groceries. And maybe during COVID, you've either received this kind of help or done it for someone else. Esteem support is any kind of communication, such as a compliment, a validation, or a relief of blame. And I know we all get a lot of, many of us get that kind of support on Facebook, in different Facebook groups. Network support refers to any communications which provide access to other support group participants. And that would be like sharing your email address or a phone number. Emotional support is any communication or act expressing care and concern. And so when I learned all of this, I would have vivid memories of each of these types of support taking place in these groups that I was facilitating over the years. And not just from me, this is all participants offering these different types of support to each other. But these types of support are not limited to patient advocacy organizations. I'm sure there are many people that get all their support needs met through their family and close friends. Unfortunately, I believe these people are in the minority. For me, someone who, with few family members and no siblings, I've always been open to forming friendships to meet a variety of my needs. In fact, I've been involved in many different groups during my life. This is just a couple of photos I could find. It doesn't represent everything, but exercise is something that I've always preferred doing with a group of people. And yoga has been my passion for years. And I tried to cultivate what they call a home practice, but it wasn't very satisfying. I belong to a women's gym here in Alameda, California. But after a few years of regular attendance, about 12 to 15 of us eventually bonded and started a monthly lunch outing after yoga class. And then about 15 years ago, when I realized that my going out at night, was becoming a little difficult for me for a variety of reasons, I had the idea of starting a book club. I had never been in a book club, but I love to read. So I invited a few friends to the house, and we had our first veggie potluck book club meeting. And over the year, the group has grown, and we're always open to new people. There's an app, a website called Nextdoor, a neighborhood website, and I've noticed occasionally somebody posts that they're looking for a book group, and I respond. So, our book group is theme based. You can read fiction or nonfiction. That's not for everyone. But over the years, we've, met strangers, and they ended up becoming good friends and avid, participants in the book group. So, I believe that if you want something and you don't see it already out there and accessible to you, you can create it. That's what's so great about the Meetup app. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Meetup, but it allows you to create your group or join other people. And now, of course, it's all mostly virtual. But I've started all kinds of groups. Several were short lived, but life is too short to have regrets. So, okay, this was a calendar with the pages flipping, and I don't think it's going to work, but just try to imagine the pages flipping. And I'm going to take another sip. So here we are, to jump ahead to January of this year. And I had transitioned away from the gym I mentioned to you. It was becoming more difficult to practice with a regular class, so I joined an adaptive gym, which is about 15 miles from my house. And this was exercising, with a group of people who also had different physical abilities, or they were limited due to, age or illness. And it felt good. I was feeling very good, so I enrolled in a public health class at a local community college. I had never taken a public health class. It was an afternoon class, so I felt comfortable driving to the location. And it was a pleasant surprise to be perhaps the oldest person in the class, the only one using a cane. And I was one of the few white people in the class. And we, unfortunately, don't have many opportunities to truly experience diversity. Oh, there it is. There's my. Okay. So also during this, just before January, I went to a conference, and there was a speaker, the woman on the left. She's from the UK, and she was presenting about a telephone hotline service that she started for seniors to combat loneliness. And she provided some statistics about this public health issue, which has turned into something of an epidemic. And she mentioned that the UK had recently selected a minister of loneliness. So I had to Google that because it it sort of sounded like a Saturday Night Live skit, The Minister of Loneliness. But sure enough, there is a woman named Tracy Crouch in the UK who has this title. So I was very intrigued what this woman had talked about and this whole phenomenon of loneliness as a public health issue. And I started thinking about loneliness in our community of people with chronic health conditions and or disability. What are the statistics? Are they similar, to the senior population? So I chose this as my topic for the public health class assignment and began my reading. And we also plan to do a podcast episode about this topic. And so, well, you know what happened. Early March, we had talked about the coronavirus, I think in February in the public health class. But at this time it was just limited to China. And so the first week of March, I remember getting scared. This was before shutdowns happened, and I skipped the class for the first 2 weeks, and then the college shut down. So I never got to present my research, and I'm still working on the podcast episode, but but it has sort of dominated my thoughts, and public health and loneliness sort of took on a whole new meaning for me. And my first concern was exercise. I knew, like I told you before, I was never successful at launching a home yoga practice. I knew I had to find online classes. So I first looked at the accessible yoga community, which is an international community. I tried a few of their classes. And then within a month, I think in the end of March, the organization I went to in Berkeley, the Adaptive Gym, brought all their classes online. And I started taking them, and I found a new community. The organization is called BORP, Bay Area Outreach for Recreational Programs, and they do have classes, I think 6 days a week: dance, chair yoga, chair, tai chi, and strength training. Many of these classes are taught by instructors living with a disability, and the students are from all over the US, a few in Canada, a few in Mexico, and they're free. So I have this other video, and I'm going to talk for the beginning of it because there's no audio, and then there's some audio that comes on, and I think we'll end on time. I think I have about 10 minutes left. Do it. Gabby, do I have about 10 minutes?
Yes, sorry, my mouse fell asleep on me. Yes, we got left.
Okay. Okay, so there we go. Good. So these classes are not just about exercise, they're about forming community. And in the last 7 months, I've formed friendships with a variety of people I've not met in person. And as much of a community person as I've been, I did not think it was possible to form a friendship with someone virtually. The yoga group I told you about, we're now meeting every 2 weeks online. Some of us eat our lunch. And I started a happy hour for people I went to high school with. We meet every week on Saturdays. We have a core group, but many new people pop up. And okay, I'm going to go back to that in a moment. Or not. You have to see the dance part. And I know Mindy's in the audience and she's thinking, oh my goodness, you're showing us dancing. Anyhow, so my every 2 weeks, the support group, we're meeting online. It's a small group, but we have different people who join us. Some people who never could have come to the in-person support group meetings. And I also started a monthly party on Zoom. It's a theme party. And the whole purpose is to have fun, and there's dancing. And I include members of all my different communities, the book club, the exercise, friends from high school, friends with myotonic dystrophy. Okay, you ready? Here comes the music. Okay, so you get the idea. We have fun. And this is not just my story. I've marveled at seeing all the creative ways to connect. One of our neighbors is a musician, and he's been holding weekly porch concerts, mostly with a masked and socially distant audience. I've been taking distant walks around our neighborhood, socially distant walks with friends, but the majority of my human connections have been virtual. I haven't traveled anywhere, and I do love to travel. Yet I've been remarkably healthy during this time. I get my daily dose of nature, I eat well, I connect with friends, and I exercise. And and the last thing I'm gonna show you is a little video from one of the dance classes I've been taking on Saturday mornings. It's called Rumba with Tina. And I have never met Tina in person, but I am delighted now to have her as a friend. She's actually featured in a podcast episode I did a couple of months ago in June. And this so there are about 30 something people that come to this class every week from all over the country, even a couple in Mexico. And one woman, Kathleen, who lives in New York, had to come to California, Sacramento, to have a complicated spinal surgery. And Tina and her husband went to visit Kathleen at the hospital. And this was the first time they met in person. And the night before the surgery, there was a surprise Zoom party for Kathleen. So in 7 months, this group of 30 or so people, we've danced together, we formed bonds. And here's one of the songs from last Saturday's Rumba with Tina class.
Because I think we could all use it. And I want you to remember that this is so much more than just a fitness class. It is our positive space for us to come together and know that we're not alone. Arms out. They're stretched out in front of us like a big hug. And because I think we could all use it. And know that our chest and down. Bring our arms up at our chest and down. Yes. Yes. Love you, Julie.
anyhow, so that is the end of my presentation. I would like to share these resources with you, and I think Gabby can email them to you. The BORP classes are free, and Tina is one of several of the instructors. I have a page of different online exercise programs in addition to BORP. And then I put together literally 50 ways to cope with COVID, things that I've accumulated over the past several months, different ways to connect with people all over. So thank you. I hope you maybe danced a little during those two pieces.
That was great. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm clapping all around. Thank you so much. We so appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with us today, and also be willing to give us insight into things that we can do to help us create connections with others, especially now. So we appreciate you so much, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we are getting close to time, but if anyone has questions for Leslie while we have her, I'd love to, if you're open to it, Leslie, maybe open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. We've got time for maybe one or two. If anyone has something they'd like to ask Leslie, or a comment of support that they'd like to share.
Oh, wait, I see a question in chat.
Oh,
okay. So Amelia, I just plugged in the links to the organizations into the chat.
perfect. And I will also happily share those. Great. Anything else? Questions?
Hey, hi, Leslie, it's Missy.
Hi.
Hi. So I am just wondering, what sort of advice do you have for parents of young children, adult children, who have neuromuscular disorder or other disability, who want their children to participate and create a social network, and we're more spread out and a smaller population than you are in the Bay Area. But I'm just wondering if you have any advice for these parents on how to connect their children or themselves as caregivers with others for any type of group, social group.
Are you talking about specifically during COVID and doing it virtually?
I'm talking about virtually and or not virtually, and not necessarily specific to COVID.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience. All my support groups were adults mostly, but there are definitely families that have children. In myotonic dystrophy, they have they formed a Facebook group for juvenile onset adults that is sort of monitored by some parents or grandparents for teens and young adults with DM to connect. In terms of the younger kids, I don't know of anything disease specific, but there are certainly different programs. My experience right now has been around exercise and dance, and I know a few of these organizations do. There's one youth hip hop, or actually two classes I know of, where they have kids dancing and the instructors are people using wheelchairs, with some disability. I mean, I have referrals for those. I can provide links. There are some online art classes that are run by, there's a shared, oh gosh, I can't remember the full name, but it's based in Northern California, but because it's virtual, It's open to everyone. And they hold different art and craft classes. I've seen a lot of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. If you
Yeah,
could
I
share
mean,
any
I
of
could,
those links, that would be really helpful.
sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
There was one question. Oh, okay. She just said thank you. And you're welcome, Catherine.
Yes, really, truly, from all of us, Leslie, thank you so much. We want to be, of course, respectful of your time and, your Saturday afternoon. So thank you again, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this session. We look forward to engaging with you at sessions throughout the day today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Leslie. That was great. Thank you.